going to tell you they don't collect all the data they need to collect. I'm going to tell you that. For instance, how many children go into foster care and then are removed from foster parents for abuse? They don't get that data. Okay? How many children go into foster care and die? They don't collect that data either. All right? So they're not getting all of it. But we've got to start understanding the good data and who's collecting it. For instance, and I'm going to show you on here, kidscount.org pretty much lays out the fact that every state has a quota of the number of children that they need to take into foster care to keep their budget balanced. So this one on Casey Foundation, and it's got a nice little, I have one much more complicated, but this has a very nice little timeline of federal legislation. And this federal legislation ultimately today has created an imbalance that they hold out is 6-1. I say it's higher when you take Medicare and you take a lot of the other things that are involved, but at least it is 6-1. $6 for foster care versus $1 for relative placement, family preservation, family services. 6-1. What does that tell you? All right, now I'm going to go through this. This is what I call foster data. Can you guys see that? Okay, do we need to turn some lights out?
Yeah, Jaime, can you grab those right over there? Thank you.
I call it foster data. Yeah, a little more. Better? Is that better? If I get in your way and you can't see it, just yell at me. It is government-sanctioned child trafficking and how it's going to affect our future. And let me get my arrows here. Oh, here we go. I'm working on the Nick's computer here.
It's always a scary thought.
Yeah. The federal financial incentives that destroy families, child welfare, and Title IV funding. It's a little bit. Hey, Nick, why don't you come up here and punch these buttons for me? Because your computer. No, I'm punching that. And you see it's kind of weird. You need to punch that. There. Ah, there we go. It takes a stronger finger. All right, so the dependency. It's a function of the dependency system. And you have these cogs that are turning, and they all are interconnected. You've got to always remember that. They're all interconnected. So you have the state agency, and you have the foster care services, which are mostly private. They are mostly private organizations making a profit off of children. And then you have the Title IV funding. Okay, let me see if I can do it. Oh, hit the center. Okay. All right, so we have the government. How is the government involved? The Department of Children's Services in Tennessee. Yours is DCF, is that correct? DHS. They have the foster care incentives through Title IV-E, requiring children to be placed in foster care to acquire the funding. The Department of Human Services is a little bit different agency in Tennessee. Some states have them still combined as one agency, but they're getting the Title IV-D money, which is the financial incentives for the collection of child support. Now, this is one of the things that when I come to these points of things that just like really grate on me, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, is when a child is put in foster care, the parents are ordered to pay child support to the freaking state. To the state. And then, of course, they can terminate parental rights if they don't pay child support to the state. There is just something about that rings wrong. You know, sometimes I hear these things and I think, because, you know, I live in that world every day where this is like common. This is how we function. Oh yeah, of course, there's Title IV money. Of course, within 10 days of being in foster care, there has to be a child support order. Well, of course they have to pay that, or they can have their rights terminated. I mean, I live in that world. I work in that world. And when I take one step back out of that world, and I look at it, and I go, what if I heard this on the news, and this was Colombia, South America? Would I not be shaking my head? And saying the government goes in and takes your child and then orders the parents to pay the government. Pay the government. Funding for abortions, Title X, Medicaid and Targeted Managed Care, Title XIX, provides endless funding for children in the foster care system that are diagnosed with a disability. Endless funding. And public health services, such as adolescent pregnancy, under Title X. Oh, might be too far down. The private sector, private hospitals, private foster care, private programs, judiciary and legal systems, and court-appointed attorneys, court-appointed guardian ad litem, and CASA workers. All of these in the private world are motivated to keep children in the system, to keep the system functioning. Private hospitals. This is another one that's just really grating me. In 2009, the AMA created a specialty called the Child Abuse Specialist. Those child abuse specialists in those children's hospitals have contracts with the state. In Tennessee, Vanderbilt University gets anywhere from $2.5 to $3 million a year from the state for services it provides to DCS. And then their child abuse specialist diagnoses child abuse, which puts the child in the system, and then they get continued funding for. Private foster care. We've already talked about that one. The private programs, the other private programs, the, parenting assessments, A&D assessments, in-home services, private drug screens, can I go on and on? Oh, anger management, and early childhood development, and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. You know, God made us so we could have children and raise them, and we're imperfect parents. Okay? We're imperfect parents. If a child is being abused or neglected, I understand. That child needs to be protected. But we don't need to micromanage the lives of parents. The judiciary and legal systems. Now, of course, the judiciary is not a private system, but the legal system is. The legal system is a private industry as well, and a very troubling one. Because of the way the system works, they make it financially impossible for parents and children to have competent representation. Financially impossible. I mean, I went to years of law school, and I have to pay all these fees and taxes and privilege taxes and training and stuff and have an office. I mean, it's expensive for me to be a lawyer. And my rates that I charge to private people are well within the standard of what the community charges. But it's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I can't do it any other way on a private basis because of the expenses and the overhead to operate on a daily basis. We don't have insurance like doctors do. But it's impossible for parents to receive good representation. I'm going to come back to that in a minute when I talk about one of the things that needs to be a solution and a resolve. Court-appointed attorneys. Another one drives me wacko. There are attorneys out there that their entire practice is based on court appointments. Now, why is that good? A nice little way to run a practice? I mean, I know some people do it. I don't have anything against them. The way, again, the system supports them. They don't have to have liability insurance. Okay? They don't have to have an office. They don't have to advertise. They don't have to pay some of the other expenses that a normal attorney has to pay on an ongoing basis. And they get fed business all the time from the judges. All the time. Fed, fed, fed. Now, what do they do in return for the judges? Now, there's some people that when they watch this video, they're going to hate me for saying this, but it's true, and I've seen it. They please the judges. I've even heard a judge say in criminal court that he gets so angry that the court-appointed attorneys are more interested in pleasing him and his workday than representing clients. DNN cases and TPR cases are by their very nature very complex cases. Attorneys need to be raising constitutional issues in these proceedings. They don't do it. If you're going to do a good TPR trial, it's probably going to take 5 or 6 days to do. Would the judge rather work 5 or 6 days or one afternoon? One afternoon. So if the court-appointed attorney doesn't subpoena any witnesses, doesn't get a rebuttal expert witness, tells their client, oh, you don't want to testify. You don't want to testify. Now your 4 or 5 day trials cut into about 4 hours at the most. Because the state puts on their proof, their experts, their witnesses, and the hearsay, and do all this crazy stuff. So, and again, I'm going to come back to that on solutions. Children are the commodity of a broken system. This is so heart-wrenching. This is so heart-wrenching. One of the things I passed out to you is a little card. And I had that card created because that picture of that little girl on the front was removed from her mom because she was late for school. The state killed her baby brother within 4 months of being in state's custody. Euthanized him. Pumped propofol into his veins. The same drug that killed Michael Jackson. Killed him because they had screwed up his medical treatment. This baby girl lost her parents, her baby brother, her grandparents, all of her family members, all within a 3-month period. Heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. You can't look at that and look in the face of a child and look at that little girl's face on that picture and not feel her pain. There we go. It is nationwide, it's worldwide, and of course you all know, and the reason you're here is you know it's right here. The result is we have government-sanctioned child trafficking, we have the rehoming of children for a profit, we have parentectomies, okay, which also happens in a family court, the total amputation of the child-parent relationship. We have generational genocide, the loss of family heritage. Antagonism. We talk about this and we're going to talk about what things need to change in the system. When I was a prosecutor, we always worked antagonistically with the public defender's office, okay? There has to be a pull going both ways. The family preservation and the termination and adoption process has to work against each other and not for each other. The way the agencies are designed now is that the same agency who's supposed to be providing services and family preservation are prosecuting parents and cutting off their rights and controlling their access to the children. An inherent conflict of interest. I did a presentation with the Indigent Task Force in Tennessee to judges and attorneys and community people. And if you want to watch some things, just go to YouTube and type in Connie Reguli, and I have several things up there. But this is a short 10-minute video. And I say you cannot have an agency that is in conflict with itself. With itself. There is not another government state agency that has such an inherent conflict.
Iowa's is one of the worst that way.
The system operates counterintuitive to the public policy of family preservation. If you look at the state laws and you look at your law that created the state agency, you're probably going to find in the very first 1 or 2 paragraphs of that law that it is the public policy of this state that we maintain the integrity of the family and family preservation and family reunification. That is the public policy under which these agencies are created. Not for sale, by the way. I made bracelets, $3 if you want a bracelet. All right, how do they do it? Y'all know this. They lower the threshold of neglect. Being late for school is now neglect. You're not a fit parent. They remove the children without hearings. They remove children from homes without hearings. I put IPA there because that's a special thing. It's called an Immediate Protection Agreement. Every state calls it something a little bit different. But you get a knock on your door, a social welfare person comes into your house and they sit there and they say, well, if you just sign this paper, and if you have a place to put your children, like, a family member, a friend or something, and you just have supervised contact with them, then we're going to get this all worked out. Or you just allow us to put in foster care temporarily until we can find out what's going on. It's called an IPA. Parents are tricked into doing it, and unfortunately, there are court cases. Now, the social workers will say, if you don't do it, we're going to go to court and get an order. If you don't do it. Now, unfortunately, the federal courts have found that IPAs are legal. They're legal and they're not coercion because the state does have the right to go get a court order and take your children. So the status of the law in the United States is that those documents are legal. Unfortunately, and it's sad, and we need to resolve that. They allow hearsay in removal hearings. In these removal hearings, if they take your child and they do give you a hearing within 72 hours, a social worker can come in and say, well, I called the school teacher and she's just not ever getting her work done and she comes in dirty and blah, 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 blah. Total hearsay. No right for cross-examination. It's even worse when they come in and say, well, I called the doctor and the doctor said he's missed 5 appointments, blah, blah, blah. So, hearsay. They lower the standard of proof for removal. The United States Supreme Court has said that we have the 14th Amendment applies, that we have in our right of privacy, that family integrity applies to every father, mother, and child. That we have an inherent right of privacy to family integrity. When you have a constitutional right, the interference of that right has to be a higher standard. There has to be precautions. And yet what they have done in state laws, and the federal government allows them to do it, is they say it's an emergency removal. They give you a 72-hour hearing. However, the threshold for proof in your 72-hour hearing for removal is called probable cause. Now, as a lawyer, that's one of these difficult mind things you have to train your mind to do. There are several standards of proof. There is reasonable suspicion. If a cop sees you walking down the street and you look funny, that's a reasonable suspicion and he can stop you and make an inquiry. There is probable cause, okay? All it takes to get somebody indicted is a probable cause. Well, it could have happened. Not probably, could have happened. There is preponderance of the evidence, which means the scale is tipped this much. And then there's clear and convincing evidence. And then there's beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, those last two standards of proof are really fuzzy because clear and convincing requires a firm conviction. Firm conviction. And reasonable doubt removes reasonable doubt. Now, I don't know what the difference is in those two, but it's supposed to be a pretty high standard. But they can take your children on an emergency order. They can give you a hearing, a removal hearing in 72 hours, and keep your kids on probable cause. Probable cause ain't right. It just ain't right. And it's wrong for the children. The children have rights too. If you get arrested on the street, let's say for soliciting a prostitute, and they take you to jail, and you spend the night in jail, and you go to court the next morning, they have to give you a bond, okay? Criminals have more rights than parents do. Criminals have more rights. They're entitled to get a bond to go out and then come back to court when necessary, but not children. Not children. Children remain hostages of the system. Hostages. Of course, they contract with local hospitals who make the findings of abuse. I already talked about that. They make parents attend programs paid by the state, so you can't go out and find and shop for your own independent program or counselor. You have to use who they tell you to use, who are feeding off the system. They lie in reports. I think everybody who's had some sensitivity to what's going on nationally knows that the Ninth Circuit out of California has said now you can't lie. A social worker can't lie. It's a violation of constitutional rights. That hasn't made it around the country yet. Make it impossible for parents to accomplish the task. I've got a perfect example of that. I represented this mom. She was ordered to go to get an assessment, a mental health assessment, and get counseling and follow the recommendations of the counselor. She did exactly what they said. She went to a counselor. She does some therapy, and her counselor basically says, you're fine. You're not a danger to your children, but I recommend that you just stay in touch with me. You just continue counseling. We go to a meeting with DCS, and I say she's completed that task. And they say, what's the recommendations of the counselor? And we're like, well, she's going to continue going to counseling. And they say, well, then she's not completed it. They make it impossible. They make it impossible. They send an in-home services to a family, and this in-home services does an assessment. And when they do the assessment, they say to this mom and dad, you got to be honest with us if you want any help. And so they say, well, we've had some marital trouble, we get mad at each other once in a while. I threw a shoe at him, and were the children present? Well, they were in the other room. They probably heard the shoe hit the wall. And then those people come to court and testify that this is a troubled family and there's violence in the home and the children are experiencing it. And it doesn't matter how much I, as an attorney, object. And I say, wait a minute. This is a confidential setting, where if you want them to receive help, they need to have a level of confidence that these matters are not going to be discussed and used against them. And there's one little sentence that they sign in that assessment that says that there's no confidentiality here. No confidentiality. I even asked the state agency, I says, look, my clients will get your services, but I want an agreed order that those people are not going to come to court and testify against them. They said, nope. Can't do that. Or they fail to acknowledge that the parents have completed the task. In our Facebook group, Family Forward Project, we have right at around 7,000 people. People send me messages 30, 40 a day. And one of those recurrent themes is like, I've done everything they told me to do, and I can't get my kids. They appoint attorneys that are sympathetic to the system. I've already addressed that one. They appoint guardian ad litem sympathetic to the system. Already talked about that one. They make the parents pay child support on removed children. They limit the contact with the children, emotionally draining these families. 4 hours a month. 4 hours a month is the minimum standard. And they think that's all they deserve. 4 hours a month. I mean, these parents get a visit with their children for an hour? An hour? How do you explain that to a 3, 4, 5, even 6-year-old child? How do you explain that? You get to see your mommy for an hour. They lie to the children. Parents don't want you. I've seen and heard all of this. I am not making it up. I've seen and heard every one of these things. Fail to disclose reports favorable to the parents. I have seen them even fail to call people to testify that they provided services, their own services, who report something friendly and nice about the parents, and they don't even call them in to testify. They cut the children off from contact with the other family members. My head spins. Grandparents, relatives, siblings, just cut them off. Cut the children off. They coerce the children into statements, false statements, or silence as a threat of losing their family or never seeing mommy and daddy again. They actually tell children that if you don't say such and such, or you don't see such and such, you may never see them again. I had a case, and I actually represented this family after they'd become involved in the system, and There was some allegation that perhaps there might have been inappropriate touching or exposure or something of sexual nature. And they went to DCS, went to school and pulled this kid out, like a 6-year-old child, and talked to him and said, if anything happened to you at your house, you may never see your mommy and daddy again. You may never see them again. And of course the child froze up. Child totally frozen. They paid the mental health professionals to diagnose children with severe psychological damage, put them on medication. It's a mess. Get more money. They drug the children after that. They allow the children to get abused in foster care and threaten them not to tell. Again, every one of these I have seen. Laws allow the hearsay removal hearing, the removal without a hearing, the secret records, the refusal to disclose the reporter, the no internal accountability, no review of placement once the state has custody, and no requirement to place with another family member. All of those are things that are supposed to be happening and parents are supposed to be protected from. And I want to talk particularly about the last two. And I spoke to a state legislator about this. And I said, once DCS has custody, the judge has no control. They can put that kid wherever they want or refuse to put that kid where they want. They have no control. And if the judge finds out they did a placement and he wants to have a hearing, he can have a hearing. He can call DCS in and make them have a hearing. But you know what? They don't have to do what he says. I says, the child is a ward of the state once they've gone into state custody. And the fact that judge no longer has control of anything that is happening. The other thing is relative placement. By federal law, if you're going to get funding, you have to attempt to do relative placement. But relatives have no ability to intervene in the case. They have no right to a court-appointed attorney. Even though there is a federal rule that basically says they have rights. I have seen it many times that they snuff out the relatives because they want to make money on that child. I put in here just a few examples. This is a child that was cut off totally from his parents with DCS and IPA, Immediate Protection Agreement, that the parents didn't even know existed because somebody else had their child for a while and they were helping them care for the child, and then that person goes and signs an IPA with DCS to keep the parents away from them. They didn't even know what had happened. DCS refused to investigate any alternative source of injury, and he didn't even see his parents for 18 months. This is the first time he saw his dad after 18 months. He was a little boy. This one was also cut off from her parents when the juvenile court magistrate allowed an attorney to file an ex parte order without notice to the parents, no affidavits, no sworn testimony. She didn't see her parents for 18 months. This is an accidental injury. This little baby rolled off the bed and received a small fracture in his knee, and the doctors at Vanderbilt reported abuse and testified it was abuse. Mother refused to turn the child over to them and was taken to prison. She was a 19-year-old mom who'd never even had a speeding ticket. She says, I'm not giving him my baby. And they said, well, you're going to jail. I said, Judge, we were in court. I said, Judge, I'd like a hearing. Nope, you're not allowed to have a hearing until we have the child. No hearing. My mama had to go to prison. And then the next day, I got a call from the deputies at the Metro Police Department, and they said, Connie, if you don't turn that baby over, the DCS is going to take felony kidnapping charges out on these parents and put them both in prison. I said, well, would you call DCS and ask them if we could have a meeting right now? And he called them, and they said, no, not until we have the baby. And that's with an attorney involved. And I'm one of the best attorneys in the area, I have to say. And that's what I run into. Now, because I got an expert to testify by telephone while he was driving to his vacation home in Massachusetts to say that this could have been accidental injury at the preliminary hearing. We got the baby back. But that took a stroke of genius and a miracle, or they would have kept that baby. Oh, this baby was removed at 2 days old from the hospital. 2 days old. Mother had a positive drug screen when she was about 3 or 4 months pregnant. Opiates, right? She cleaned herself up, had a baby. She's fine. Baby's fine. No drugs in the meconium, no addiction with the baby, no abstinence withdrawal from the baby. She had really pulled her life together. They took that baby at 2 days old. Now, I was involved in this case too, and this is why I want you to understand it's going to take more than good lawyers. This mama had this baby, and she posted it on Facebook, and I happened to see it. And the next day, she posted, well, DCS has been in here and said, I can't hold my baby anymore. And I said, give me your phone number. And I called her up. She was in Knoxville, 3.5 hours away from me. I said, give me the phone number for the nurse's station. So I called the nurse's station, and I said, you better not let anybody take that baby without a court order. I said, I want that baby's records, and I want the mom's records. And she goes, well, we can't do it without a release. I said, I bet you have a form right there in the nurse's station. You can walk down the hall, and she can sign it for you right now. I want the records. You can fax them to me. I want to review them. She goes, well, this happened to be July the 3rd in 2014. It was on a Thursday. She goes, well, there's no way we can do that before Monday. I says, I'm just telling you, you better not let somebody walk out of that hospital without a court order. On the 4th of July, which was a Friday, DCS found a magistrate to sign an order. And it said that the reason for the removal of the child was because of the mother's prior involvement with DCS. That's the best reason they had. And they walked out of there with that child. She saw that baby 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week. And they ultimately terminated her parental rights because of that opiate drug screen when she was pregnant. And she did everything. She got a job. She got out of a relationship that wasn't healthy. She did everything, and they took her baby. This one is out of Missouri. This is one of somebody I met, connected with through Facebook. They refused to place with the loving grandmother, and soon after placement, she had swollen eyes and a busted lip.
Oh.
Foster care. False charges. This is one out of Texas. Her adopted son died of AIDS when the state withheld that. After the state had withheld that information from the coroner, the mother was charged with murder. This is a case in Texas, and actually her family's on the next slide, so I'm going to show it to you. Angel Cook. She has 6 children, and she was visiting some relatives, and it's kind of a complex story, but there was a baby crying in a tent, and there were some things going on, and she got those 2 children, a little baby and a little boy about 2 years old, and was allowed to take them back to Texas and adopt them. She was not told the 2-year-old little boy had been sexually assaulted and had AIDS when she adopted him. She did not know that. 2 years later, and that's him. Oops, that other picture back there. I just showed you was him at 4 years old. I think that was him right there. At 4 years old, he died. They almost immediately charged her and her husband with murder and took all of her children. Took all her children. Now, she had the stamina of a saint. She fought it, she fought it, she fought it. It took over a year, and she did get her children back. Her children were sexually assaulted. She had a child who had a medical condition who was abused in foster care. She is now in a big lawsuit with the state of Texas. Blaming the parents. This is a Tennessee family. When she tried to get assistance with one child who was suffering from severe emotional problems, the judge blamed the mother and removed the children. There are parents who have contacted me and say, you know, I was having trouble with my child and I called DCS for help. I called for help. I thought they would have some services for my children because we have such a blight of children, real services for children who suffer from emotional trauma or emotional abuse when they're young. She called DCS. They blamed her for the problems of the child and removed all the children and never reunited. This is the one I already told you about. Coercing him by saying that if you tell, you will lose your family, what they told the child. And then they threatened other witnesses, stating, we will take your children if you let them give witness statements. So in other words, if your children say anything that they might have made an observation of something that should be reported and attended to, you could lose your children too. Criminals have more rights. Criminals have the right to a fair hearing, the right to all evidence, even if it's in their favor, the right to face the accuser, the right to an evidentiary hearing, the heightened burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the right to a jury trial, and the right to attend and participate in drug court. They spend millions of dollars across this country for drug court in criminal cases. People are allowed to go through a special system to get treatment, and they don't face those charges. And parents are denied something similar. Here's what people say about their child welfare experience. Now, I did a survey. Here's what they said. Were you placed under a permanency plan or family services or by any other name that required you to perform certain tasks? Yes, 60%. If so, did the state agency fairly evaluate the needs of your family? No, 80%. Were the requirements of the plan related to the reason for removal? No, 60%. Did the resources provided satisfy the agency once you engage the service, that is, parenting class? No, over 50%. In your opinion, did the state agency appear to be sabotaging your ability to complete the requirements? Yes, almost 70% of the time the parents felt sabotaged. Did the agency do their part in providing you all resources needed to satisfy their demands? Well over 70%? No. Did you complete the services set forth on the plan? Over 50%, almost 60%, yes. Were your children returned to your care and control with the end of the plan? No, 60% of the time. Were you treated fairly? 80%? No. Now, and I want to go back to that for just a minute, and let's think about that. Remember, and I remind these agencies and courts sometimes, that they are our employees. They are our employees. I've been in a courtroom before where when I go in the courtroom and they now have 4 or 5 attorneys on the other side employed by the state, and I'll say, I just want to put on the record that I'm standing over here representing the parents, and on the other side of the room there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people on the taxpayer's payroll. And we, being parent over here, are the taxpayers, okay? They're on our payroll, folks. They are on our payroll. We pay them. Demand that they work for you. This just is a sample from Tennessee, DCS State, and you can see down here, it's a little blurry to me, but about 46% of their budget is the state funds. All the rest of the money comes from someplace else. 4E, 4B, that's Social Services Block Grant, TennCare, Medicaid. Dollar for dollar, only about 40%, 46% of the money is state money. This is Kids Count Data Center. This one is Tennessee. Committed to state custody. Look at this. Pretty much, except for a little peek right here, pretty much 7,000 children a year get committed. That's a quota. It's a quota. It means we're not doing any better at what we're doing. in foster care, 6,500. Same number. Cycling them through the system. This one is exiting foster care. I'm sorry, it didn't move forward. Iowa. I gathered this information for you when I intended to come the last time. This is child abuse and neglect per 1,000 children. So look at this. Isn't this interesting? We have this huge drop here in 2014. Entering foster care. Kind of dipped a little bit, but look here. 5,000 children a year entering the foster care system. Exiting foster care. 4,500 children a year in Iowa. In foster care. Look at that line. Can't get any straighter, can it? 6,500 children. Can't get any straighter. That's your quota. That's your number. If any of you go to YouTube and you look up Molly Tierney, she has a TED Talk. In TED Talk, she was the head of the CPS. She is the head still, again, in Maryland. She talks about she was able, the way she ran her agency, to reduce foster care by 50%. I submit to you that Iowa can reduce foster care by 50%. 50%.
But our legislator who is in charge of it doesn't want to.
Of course they don't want to, because of the money. And so we have to be in charge. Florida. I'm doing some presentations in Florida. Look at Florida, 16 to 18,000. Florida, Texas, Arizona, some of the worst states in the union as far as taking children. Children entering foster care, again, flat line, 14 to 16,000. Now, this is interesting. This is neglect. This is the reasons for placement in foster care. Neglect. 52% neglect. Other, 47%. So that leaves only 2% for emotional abuse, only 2% for medical neglect, only 3% for sexual assault.
And I've noticed now that they know that the people who are watching the statistics, the medical kidnaps are actually increasing substantially.
Yeah.
They're like moving the bar.
Right. Because they have doctors, child abuse experts, who will testify in their behalf. But over 90% of children are either neglect or other. What is other? Adoption, 23%. Gives you where do the children go once they enter in foster care. That one happens to be Florida. This one is also Florida. This is 1 to 5. Look, the largest number of children adopted, age range, 1 to 5. 1 to 5.
Highly adoptable.
Highly adoptable. Primary market. Young children, you can erase their memory. You can erase their memory. National data. National estimates of children who received an investigation or alternative response increased 7.4%. Increased by 7.4% from 2010 to 2014. Number rated victims of maltreatment have fluctuated during the past 5 years. Comparing the national estimate of victims in 2010 to 2014 show an increase of less than 1%. This one's important where I have the green arrow. 3/4 of the victims were neglected, 17% physically abused, and 8% sexually abused. 3/4, 75%. 2014 national estimate of 1,580 children died of abuse and neglect at the rate of 2.13% and 100,000 children in the national population. Child death is real. It is real. I prosecuted child death. My very first jury trial was a child death. I understand that. But we have become so distracted and so disjointed from what we're really supposed to be doing and protecting children that we are missing it. We are missing it.
Connie, Iowa is 8th in the nation at placing children in foster care.
8th.
And they're 32nd in population.
Yeah. I believe it. This is the federal budget. This is a federal budget for ACF. I don't know what ACF is, I should know. Child something, okay? I'll have to go back and look that up for you. But this is basically the funds for children. 15% of the entire budget is foster care. This is important. This is a visual you need to also walk away with. All right, this number, this flyer I handed you earlier said 6 to 1. Look at these numbers. Title 4B, Title 4E. It is 10 to 1. 10 times the amount of money goes to foster care as to family preservation. 10 times. The numbers are right here. This is a publication from the National Congressional blah, 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 blah. They write a report every year. I get it. The National Congressional Research Service is what it is. And the same person writes these reports. I put them up every year. Always find some interesting graph in there. Fact. Estimated percentage with at least one re-report within 6 months of the index report is the lowest for formal kinship care. The lowest percentage for the child being exposed to some type of abuse or neglect is when there is a formal placement with a relative. The Family Connections grants. This is grant money that was provided to help stimulate kinship placement. 2015, zero. All those funds have been withdrawn from the federal budget. Zero. Beginning, this is a summary of the history of the laws. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that today. But what's important that you know is that it really started, I've got it starting here in 1974 with CAPTA. The whole child welfare system really started with federal funding in 1935 with the Social Security Act. The first time there was really an establishment of an agency for child protection. Before that, it was the Humane Society that dealt with that. And so, but these layers and layers and layers of legislation. And in 1974 was really the sort of the turn where really the foster care started taking a hold and started controlling. You know, I have a water in that bag if somebody would get that for me.
This one?
That white, yeah, there you go, thank you. One of the things about America, I would tell you, this became a real interest of mine, so I really started doing some historic research. We have a horrible history of human rights violations. Horrible history of human rights violations. We are not so great. Let me give you some examples. From 1870 to 1920, the government ran what were called orphan trains. The orphan trains were where children were picked up in New York City and put on trains and shipped across the country, across the Midwest, and lined up on train stations. And the farmers and the pioneers could come up to the train station and pick out a couple children. In about the same time period, our government was picking up Indian children, indigenous Indian children off the reservations and shipping them involuntarily to boarding schools in the East and cutting their hair and making them dress in Western clothes and learn English and not allowing them to speak their indigenous language because we thought it would be better for them. I've studied several of the early Supreme Court cases in the early 20th century. And there's a Supreme Court case called Bell versus Buck, written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. And it's a case in which they approved involuntary sterilization of people who were mentally retarded. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, our Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time, said in the opinion, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. There are Supreme Court cases at the same time period in which a little girl who had cerebral palsy was not allowed to go to public school because she was too grotesque to look at for the other children in her class. We have a horrible history of human rights violations. Stop thinking we're so great. We're not. We are not. We're horrible. We need to take it serious. Stop thinking we're a great nation. We're not. If you think about the things that I've told you today, and you put your blinders on and you just pretend like you're hearing it on the news, like I said, from Bogota, Colombia, and you hear about children being ripped out of their homes and sold to people who they can give government money to and black market them. We should weep. We should weep. Children are so fragile. There's this misconception that children are malleable and children are flexible and children can adjust and children can this. No, no, no. The first 10 years of their life, if they don't understand safety and security, if they don't feel safe and they don't feel secure and they don't know who their connections are, they are lost. They are lost.
We know.
Yes. And we are removing generations. It is social engineering. It is eugenics at its finest. More laws. CAPTA reauthorized in 2010. More money, more money, more money. Even during sequestration, let me tell you about Title IV money. It is unlimited, and it is a use it or lose it scheme. So if you don't use the $4 million, $6 million, $10 million that we give you, state, you're not going to get it next year. But it's endless. Now I followed up in my state because I'm real nosy. Jim Henry, Governor Bill Haslam's pick for commissioner of the Department of Children's Services, no stranger to the struggling agency. I got this right from a news release. I didn't even write this, okay? Henry, 67, will continue to oversee the Department of Intellectual and Development of Disabilities. But before Haslam appointed Henry to that position in 2011, he served his 13 years as the president and CEO of Nashville-based Omnivisions, the largest private agency doing business with DCS. DCS currently has a $51 million contract with Omnivisions to serve the difficult-to-place foster children. The company also offers similar services to children and adults in Georgia, Kentucky, North Carolina. Oh, no longer affiliated with the company. According to state employee disclosure form, shows that he divested his stock in 2012. Yeah, to his cousin, probably. Jim Henry was appointed by the governor to serve under Tennessee's Department of Children's Services for 4 years, 2011 to 2015, and I started making noise about it all over the internet, and he changed his position to chief of staff, which is a $60,000 a year pay cut job. Why do you think he would do that? Because while he served as a DCS commissioner, his company made $253 million. $253 million. There's the contract. $51 million a year. Omnivisions, Inc. Paradigm shift. We have to have a paradigm shift in child welfare. We have to prohibit conflicts of interest within the agency and the private contractors. The state agency must be dissected into prosecutorial, prosecution versus restoration of families. There must be enhanced screening and services, including family support. I had a family, I had a disabled mother, and she didn't have much money. I was trying to keep my fees down. I wrote a letter to the commissioner's office, and I said, you know, Miss Doe, she needs an advocate. She needs a parent advocate to sit with her in all these meetings, to follow up, make sure she's in the right place at the right time. She can't afford for me to micromanage her case. They wrote me back this letter, one paragraph letter. It says, we don't have anybody who can fulfill that position. Incorporate law enforcement investigations in child abuse. They don't even take photographs. They don't even take photographs. I have had them take photographs on their phone and then lose them. I've had them take a photograph of a child who got spanked, he had a bruise on the bottom, and they start emailing that photograph around that little boy, 8-year-old boy's naked butt. As a prosecutor, you have a CID, a Criminal Investigation Division. They handle their evidence like professionals. CPS does not. Family stability and relative placement programs have to be enhanced, must be. Oversight, accountability, parent advocates, a reporting mechanism, and a Family Integrity Act, which is what I've given you today. What we can do, we have to have a critical mass of people. We have to have a critical mass. I've been out talking for 10 years. Thank God for social media. Thank God for social media. I was walking about and I was seeing these things. It was driving me crazy. And I had more than one case. I had several cases I'd seen this. And I'd go and talk to state reps or even our congressman. And he's like, well, I'm sure your client did something. Right? I'm like, no. You don't know. These families are out there. There's thousands of them. Thousands. We have to create the family focus, rehabilitate the family, change laws, demand waivers under Title IV-E. There is an ability under Title IV-E to get waivers for family rehabilitation. Create accountability and demand family advocacy in the courts.
Our media is not helping because it's a vignette operation. And now for 2 years of hounding the deputy editor, I mean, she just clearly says, you know, I'm not going to do it. So, what do? We have only one candidate for a governor here, and they don't know what's going on. So, what do?
Okay, let me finish, and then we're going to talk some more about that. I'm almost finished, actually. Thank you for being patient. Create critical mass, gather up. Nick's got an organization here in Iowa. He's got a Facebook page. We have a group, the Family Forward Project. Again, radio, legislators. I'm talking all over the place, every place that I can. And basically the money is infecting the system. All right, so questions. What do we do? And trust me, I lose sleep at night over this. There are things we can't do. Okay, let's talk about what we can't do so we can just chalk them off the list. Our government is supposed to be 3 branches of government. It's supposed to have an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. Our legislative branch is supposed to be the branch of government that is most closely associated with the people and the heartbeat of the people. They're supposed to be passing laws that are in the best interest and the welfare of the people. The truth is that legislators are so hounded by lobbyists. You're so hounded by lobbyists, even by your own governor. As I have recently found out that the governor sends people down to lobby against bills that might affect his state agencies. Because remember, the governor is in charge of this agency. The agency is within the executive branch. He has to get his budget from the legislative branch. All right? So, we cannot do, honestly, I just think it's going to be impossible. We don't need to stop trying, and we need to keep talking about it. I don't think we're going to make a change by pounding on their doors. You got to fix this law, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. We are going to have to create a new idea. There are things, I am working really hard. As I said, I have a private practice. In my ideal world, I would be able to leave that and work within this type of program all the time. Because we have got to create a program for family rehabilitation and family advocacy and family programs, and then get contracts with the state. Okay.
We have to get rid of our granddaddy perp in the Senate right now. I mean, he is the granddaddy of the program, seeing that the money comes down.
Right. And you would be talking about grass. I thought so. Yes. Oh, it's deep. It's thick in Congress. It's thick. It's thick. They're so tied in. They're so tied into the money. And you know, and we haven't even talked about child trafficking, child sex trafficking, disappearance of children. We haven't talked about how people go into foster care professionally and get 8, 9, 10, 12 children into their foster homes. The social workers get kickbacks. Okay.
They're just now starting to talk about the missing foster care children. I think it was 87,000.
Yeah, I don't know. There was a recent article in Florida. I didn't think it was quite that high, but it was like 1,800 or something. It was substantial. It was what?
Yeah, it was like 70,000 in Kansas.
Yeah.
One county or something.
And these foster homes, and then in addition to that, and I said to my state legislator too, I said, look, once DCS adopts that child into a home, they never call them in again. I said, what we really don't know is these homes that adopt children and then get an adoption subsidy, an adoption subsistence program, whether or not that child is even with them for the next 10 years or whatever. There is no accountability there. Who knows where those children are? And I think there are more children missing than we can even imagine in that part of the system. At least in foster care, they're going to say, well, you know, we do call on them once a month. We do have caseworkers, you know, once a month. They're going to say that. But what about those that end up adopted out? You know, fortunately, I have developed a long-term relationship with a local reporter who is doing some stories for me. There are other stories that are being touched on nationally.
We're working on the Huffington Post and the Guardian.
And those are two very good ones. And Terry LaPointe, who is an advocate in Alabama who writes for Medical Kidnap, was just interviewed by Michelle Malkin. And they're creating a documentary on it. So we have to find little places that we can grab onto and keep working on. But we've got to create our own. We've got to, you know, everything in the world starts with a thought, right? And so the thought is we have to have the family advocacy system in place, and we need to then start asking for state contracts on that. So that's one thing that I know, you know, I'm kind of working on, I'm kind of developing. I'm still talking, I'm still trying to change laws, I'm still getting resolutions passed, and still keeping it out there. And trying to build our group more and more. We had a great, if you got to go to the Parent March in Washington, it was great. If you didn't, I think they'll do it again in September. Please try to go. Please try to go. And if you know, we're not 1 million strong yet, but you get to touch and feel and see people from other states and understand that this problem is bigger than Iowa. And I know you know it, but to see those faces, it's very important. I know another thing as far as what can we do, I don't know if maybe you could take a few minutes to talk about it, but it's the ADA. Okay, ADA is Americans with Disabilities Act. Let me tell you why it's important. It's important because the state has no immunity for any violations brought under ADA. Legislatively, they have no immunity.
We're going to take care of that because we have a man now who is going to get judges so they aren't judges anymore, so they can get off the hook.
Off the hook for ADA?
Iowa's Constitution has a judge guilty of whatever he's guilty of until he dies. But we're going to get the judges so they are not guilty anymore.
Okay.
I think she's referring to the whistleblower protection in the judiciary that we're working on.
Okay. So ADA, there is no immunity. This is why this is important. I have a couple civil rights cases I'm working on. You cannot sue the state. So even though the state agencies are violating constitutional rights day in and day out, you cannot sue them. I would like to be very creative at some point and figure out how to, because you can't sue the state because you cannot get to the public treasury of the state. However, when you keep in mind, if I go back 20 slides there, half of their money is coming from the federal government, right? It's not coming from the public treasury of the state. So perhaps there's a way ultimately to attack them for the misuse of those funds, and there's a few different ways to do that. But civil rights cases are very complicated. I now have, in 2015, the Department of Justice went to Massachusetts, and they made a finding that there had been a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act when a mother who was mentally slow, she had a little baby, she couldn't take care of her baby. They took her child, the state took her child. Her mother said, I will take my daughter in, I will bring the baby into my home, I'll help her parent, I'll be her parent. They said no. And so, by the grace of God, I don't know who made it happen, the Department of Justice got involved and wrote an opinion letter. Now let me tell you why that opinion letter is so important. It's not law, but there's a case from the United States Supreme Court called Olmstead v. LC, and it's a case in which women were being locked in mental health facilities beyond the time period of which they were no longer a threat to themselves or to society, and they weren't letting them out. And they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they said it's a violation of ADA. But what's more important in that case is that they say that because the Department of Justice had made some rulings on it, that the court could rely upon that as law. So I currently have the first one that I know of. I don't know what's going to happen. It's like a very bizarre thing. But I've sued the state of Tennessee for an ADA violation on a father who had some disabilities, very similar to what happened in Massachusetts. A very interesting case because I have two civil rights cases going. One of them, we have, in a year's time, we have 5,000 pages filed with the federal court. I put well over 600 hours in it. We have 10 experts. Okay? In this case I'm talking about, the ADA case, there's 100 pages filed. I have an expert. The state doesn't even have an expert. And we're going to court on it. They didn't even get an expert witness. So, I mean, the whole case may fall apart, I don't know, but I think ADA is an avenue because, parents come into the system and they say, well, you're not competent to be a parent. ADA, the definition of ADA is very broad.
Well, another is the RICO.
Yes.
I've been told by two that the RICO is probably the best bet.
Well, RICO is, again, very complex litigation. Very complex litigation. And the thing that you have to remember is for attorneys to do this, it's very taxing on attorneys because you don't get paid until the end of the day, if at all. So again, one of the reasons I want to have a nonprofit organization is so that nonprofit can be funded just to help pay expenses and time and stuff to make some of these things happen. People all the time are asking me, I've got a great civil rights lawsuit, and I'm like, I'm sure you do. Yes, ma'am.
So Connie, do you believe, or have you heard of the concept of a private attorney general being invoked? I know in Florida, I've seen it invoked in a couple of cases, and in Texas as well. A private attorney general is someone that is in the private sector that comes upon for a class of stakeholders. They bring suit against the state or bad actors for private citizens. And they are, as I understand, if they do win the case, they are entitled to attorney's fees. However, it's the private sector acting on behalf of the people. And I wondered if you'd ever thought about using that, or do you think that would be a great strategy?
Well, our attorney general, so-called, is the CEO of our Kids for Cash program. And we're in a situation where...
Okay, so I'm not familiar with that. However, I will say, again, I learned this as a prosecutor, anybody can go to the grand jury. Anybody can do a presentment to the grand jury, in federal or state. And I've been looking into Tennessee's law for official oppression. And if you look at the official oppression law, it's pretty strong language about government officials using their position to violate your rights and privileges. But of course, even if you get them indicted, then you have to get them prosecuted. So, and I have heard there is law in Tennessee that says that not necessarily a district attorney that's totally private, but that you can have a private attorney work with the district attorney in a prosecution. That can be allowed as well.
Connie approached the ADA organization here in Iowa about 3 or 4 years ago and asked them to help us because we had some disabled people that had lost their children. And they said that they would not go up against DHS.
Wow.
Another thing about the ADA though, like specifically what we are being trained in, is we are specifically being trained on how to apply the ADA directly to litigation. It is very, very different from what the average ADA coordinator or average ADA advocate is knowledgeable and aware of. We are specifically trained on how to apply it directly to courts and hold them accountable all the way through.
Another problem that I know we've been having with our ADA is that from my understanding, this is not legal, but the judges have been removing them from the courtroom as soon as they find out they are an ADA advocate.
Can't hear you guys.
We said that they
are
removed
protected against any type of retaliation. They can still remove us at onset or deny and negotiate as far as which accommodations are met. But then again, they can still be in direct violation, and we will follow through with those consequences.
Yeah, and I would say generally, they should not be allowed to eliminate an ADA because the ADA law, I mean, we even have on subpoenas now, we have ADA notices and stuff that say on the subpoenas, and Tennessee got sued on Tennessee v. Lane is an ADA case about the court system. It's about stairs and stuff, but anyway, it's about, that case says it applies to the whole court system. So I would say, that absolutely, if they have an ADA advocate and they qualify, first of all, I put in a notice of ADA that this person qualifies under ADA. I put in notice, I just do a one-page notice that I put in the file and then bring it to the court's attention. Yeah.
I'm battling with DHS right now. I got my 4 kids again, but I just got a phone call because I got injured on the job and I had a workman comp suit going. And I've been waiting on a secondary disability payment. And my attorney called me this morning to let me know how old it's been. An attorney working for DHS, they called him this morning to let him know that there might be a little conflict of interest. And so I requested for a new attorney. What would you do?
Okay, so say that one more time. So you have a
Okay, so I
disability.
got injured over a year ago, and I had to go undergo 2 surgeries. And I reached out for help from domestic abuse in 2014, and they took my kids, and then they took my kids again, and I've been trying to get my kids back. They went against my civil no contact order, they granted me a final no contact order, they gave me custody of our kids, and then my husband was allowed to sign off on a nationwide removal, and a DHS worker and 6 police lured my kids out of a safe house in Oskaloosa. And I got a phone call this morning from my attorney to let me know that the reason why I haven't got my second disability claim payment, that the holdup was a DHS attorney that called him to let him know that there might be just a little bit of conflict of interest in that, what should we do about this? So he called and asked me, and I told him, well, I wanted another attorney, of course. But what is it? I mean, when I'm trying to get my kids out of foster care, my son was beat in foster care in 2014, my daughter sexually harassed. My 4 kids now are being abused. I have solid proof to one of the judges. And he's still put in foster care. There's a court order stating my kids are not to be separated. They're now more separated. They separated my boys, and then yesterday, by the grace of God, he's back with his brother in Ames, but he was 2.5 hours away. So my girls are in Maryland, my boys have been, well, they were all 4 in Maryland, and then the foster care dad signed my kid up against the house last week. I've been screaming for help, reaching out for help. They have done nothing but violate every civil and constitutional right as an American, and my kids and my children are just human beings. And I mean, I was weeping when you said that we shouldn't be weeping because my kids have been traumatized and just railroaded, and enough is enough, and we need a critical mass of people. Nobody wants to stand up to DHS. Well, I'm here today to stand up to DHS by the grace of God, and so this is just.
Well, and thank you and bless you for that. And I know I was talking to Nancy last night, and it's like people that go through the system, either if they never get their children back, they're so totally devastated and traumatized. And I mean, if you've watched the movie Sophie's Choice, I mean, she became mentally deranged after her children were taken. I've lost 3 mothers to suicide in the last year and a half.
Another point of data there's no data about.
Exactly.
There's no data about suicides, how kids, more parents.
As a great result of, CPS, yeah.
And if they do get their children back, one or two things. Either they're so scared that they'll come after them again.
That's what they did to me.
So scared they'll come after them again. Or they go, I don't even want to talk about it. It's so horrible. I don't even want to talk about it.
Cannot handle it anymore.
My son threatened to commit suicide if they let him back. My 12-year-old son threatened to commit suicide because a foster mom beat him because he has a disability in his colon. They beat him and they stripped him down and they took him outside and hosed him off like he was a dog. And they still have my 4 kids today. Yes.
On November 8th and 9th, here in Des Moines, you will have a chance to tell your stories in the camera.
Well, we go to the court on the 31st and I have an attorney.
Get somebody to tell it for you.
Yes, I have a 4th attorney since May, and she is a saint and an angel. And let me tell you, we got it figured out, how they inflict the emotional distress, how they hunt you down, and they create child abuse, and they intimidate you, and they scare you into the terror living. They are the ones that need the mental health evaluations. They are the ones that need the drug evaluations. They are the ones that need to be taken down and reformed, because it is the government, it is DHS, Des Moines PD, the county attorneys. They're a sister act undercover, and enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Exactly.
Connie, I have come across, I've been involved in this for 9 years. In 2009, or 8 years, 2009, I took my grandchildren from me after I had them for 14 months. So after all these years, now I'm coming across different situations of what happens after they take the children. Number one, my daughter had another child almost 2 years ago. I had learned through all this process how to beat the system. So I got to a judge before DHS did and got a guardianship signed over to me. So DHS had no reason to take the child from me because there was nothing wrong, nothing found it. But now I have my grandchild, my oldest granddaughter from that family that was taken, is turning 18 on Sunday. She is a mess. They've got her highly drugged. The adoptive family is telling her we're abusive, our home is not safe. They're brainwashing her, which the adoptive family don't know the story. They don't know that we were innocent. They don't know that my daughter was not founded on any abuse.
Right.
And so now she's terrified, and she's a mess. The other child in that home has been taken and locked up in a group facility, and his life has been ruined. He has been drugged all these years on the highest amount of medication they could give him, and his life has been destroyed. And he was taken when he was 5. He'd done nothing wrong. We'd done nothing wrong, and his life has been ruined.
Right. Absolutely.
I went back to his GAL, who was in the case originally, because he didn't want them to take him from me, and told him what was going on. And he happens to be on the child advocacy board too. So hopefully, he said he'd look into it. But those kids have been destroyed. And not to mention the other 2 that were put in a different home and have been shipped off to Arizona.
Yeah. And, and one of the things that will, again, critical mass. I think one of the things that I'm keeping my eyes open for is kids who've been through the system. I was in Arizona 2 weeks ago, and I met a young lady who's 21 maybe now. And and her mom was there with her, and she had been taken from her mom when she was 16 years old, and on some crazy charge, and been kept away from her mom, and finally was able to reunite with her mom. And she tells the story. I mean, she is, bless her heart, she made it through it without too much damage. But she said it was horrible. She goes, the way she was treated was horrible. There's for the Facebookers, there's a young lady out of northern Michigan, and I've been watching her a lot, Miss Little, and she tells, she's a diamond in the rough, and she's pretty edgy, but she was taken when she was 5 years old, and she's now 27, 28 years old, and she says she was in prison for 21 years because they then put her in a guardianship, and she's angry and she's mad and she's rough, but you have to look at her and listen to her, and you have to go, man, it's like, how would you even survive that? I mean, people talk about being a prisoner, you know, prisoner of war in Vietnam for 5 years, but being a prisoner from the time you're 5 years old, it's just unfathomable to me. So, anybody else got any ideas?
In cases like that, like the best explanation that I can give to families is that when I learned all about parental alienation, I applied that to my children as they have been aging out, as you already know. My oldest has aged out, but my second oldest, at that point in time when my oldest had aged out, I had already been brainwashed and didn't want anything to do with me, etc. I applied exactly the steps and techniques that I was told or read about by Dr. Childress. Just the once a month, I love you on here. I love you on here. And just 2 nights ago, I heard from him for the 4th time.
And we do that, we always talk about it. But she is so much in doubt because she's taken it from us. And she thinks that we did bad stuff, and that's the reason she was taken. And she thinks her mom was doing drugs. Her mother wasn't doing drugs.
Yeah.
Her mother didn't do drugs until after they took her children in, and she slid into the gutter.
And the horrible thing is that CPS also gives the adoptive families completely opposite paperwork, and I have proof of that. So,
I was so bad
what
that
the
FBI
adoptive
doesn't want to work here.
That the what? The FBI? Yeah, and you know, and here's, you know, it would be great for me to have as a lawyer an incredible lawsuit in behalf of a kid who aged out of the system. But remember, they've only got a year from the time they age out. So if they don't recognize before they turn 19 years old how much damage has been done to them, they're going to lose that right.
And they taught my children that, and they went to a religious home, they taught my children by the adoptive parents that lawsuits are the devil. So, my son did not. My oldest did not.
So, you know, and there's a lot of other little side things that go to this that are kind of out there. And I just have to bring this up since you talked about a religious home. They now, of course, allow same-sex couples to be foster parents, okay? Now, I don't care how somebody lives their life, but if my child went into foster care, I don't think I would want them to be raised in that environment because you know what? It's not their environment. It's being forced upon them. I know there's a family in Tennessee that are Amish, and their 6 children were taken. And they were taken and put in secular homes, and they cut their hair and they changed their clothes and, you know, told them that their parents were hyper-religious and shouldn't listen to them. And it's like, you know, you don't have that choice. This is that child's right to have that environment. So, you know, there's all these other little side things these abuses that are going on that honestly are never mentioned. Never mentioned. Never mentioned.
I'm taking like Latino, Spanish-speaking children and putting them in English-speaking only homes because there's no other alternative. I can't imagine when you're not able to communicate even with temporary parents. Like, I couldn't even imagine.
Right. And then there's the other issue of immigration, of course. And we have this influx of immigration. You know, I'm a conservative person, so I think people should come in legally, but, you know, that's just my personal opinion. But let's just think about that for a minute. We have this huge influx of immigration, of immigrants who really don't have jobs, who don't really have any stability, and they have lots of children with them. Those are children that are going to continue to feed the system. If a family is homeless, they will take the children out and they will take let's say 4 children. There's a case in Arizona, they took 3 or 4 children because dad was out of work and they were homeless for a period of time. They take those 3 or 4 children, put them in a foster home, give the foster parents $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a month, and then they won't give them back because they're too poor. I have stood before the Tennessee Court of Appeals and said, poverty is a social issue. It is not the reason to cut a parent off from their children. There are people who are in prison for murder who get to see their children.
I've seen people get out after 3 years after murdering someone.
Right.
Our meeting on the 8th, and it'll be 8th and 9th, is going to be a poor people's party. And you can take party that would be focused in a way that things were once in France.
Yeah. Well, and there's a book that came out last year that got a lot of press and a lot of notoriety, and it's called The Poverty Industry. The Poverty Industry. And that author is,
He's from the same place that Molly is.
Daniel Hatcher.
He's from Maryland?
He's a law professor.
I thought he was a law professor. Yeah, he's a law professor.
Daniel Hatcher.
And so, that kind of ties in. So there is information that's kind of starting to bubble to the surface. It's still a dark, dirty secret among the suburbs of the people who fit in the top of the bell curve with their family, and their children go to soccer and ballet, and they have tutoring and all that masterful stuff. But it's there are things that are starting to form. Again, we just have to collect that information. There are a few people, I keep my eyes open, my little googly eyes open for other professionals. Every time I see an attorney in a state pop up that she's done something or defended a family, I've kind of got a little list and a scroll. If I could do, one of my goals, one of my dreams is to do a class action lawsuit on behalf of children who are wrongfully removed and wrongfully imprisoned and retained in the foster care system. If we can get a template for that, we can perhaps raise that in several states, but I've got to have at least some attorney in that place who can help foster that and kind of guide it through the system.
What about Sean?
Sean is great. Sean is great, and
He has some attorneys that work in other states.
I don't know about that. I don't know, but he's great. He's had success. California's a little bit different. California's welfare agencies are county agencies and not state agencies, so it means he can sue the county. So you cannot sue the state. So my other civil rights case is a juvenile detention case, and it is against the county. So there's good and bad things about that, but I do get to sue the county for that. So
I think we have someone who was here, actually. I think it was a gentleman who was somehow harassed or discriminated against, and he is suing the state attorney.
now you did have a very interesting case come out of the Iowa Supreme Court last year.
Godfrey case.
Godfrey case. I read
Due
all
process violations.
103 pages of that. Very verbose. But in summary, here's my takeaway from that. Was that the Iowa Supreme Court ruled that your Constitution was self-executing as far as constitutional rights. And that's really actually pretty important. And let me give you an example. So in Tennessee, we have the Victims' Bill of Rights, which is for criminal victims. And it says they are entitled to know what the charges are, to be informed of court proceedings, to be prepared for trial, to testify at sentencing, etc. However, the Tennessee Supreme Court has ruled that even though that's a constitutional right in the Tennessee Constitution, there is no relief if it's violated. Right? You can't sue anybody, you can't do anything about it, you can't bring an action, you can't. So, but this Iowa Supreme Court case, this Godfrey case, here's my takeaway, is that the rights that are established within your state constitution are self-executing, unless there's something someplace else that says that you can't execute on it, which is what your legislature will end up doing, is ripping away all your rights. But, so it means that you, and I haven't read the entire Constitution, but any rights within there to, let's say, jury trial. I mean, I think if parents want a jury trial related to the loss of their rights, they should be able to demand it.
But our government now works according to the Iowa Code, not the Constitution.
Well, right, the Constitution still trumps the day, though, if you have good attorneys.
It does. If your attorney general is
If you have a good attorney who will say it's unconstitutional, yeah.
So I have 2 kids at school, prisoners and breathing rifles. DHS took my kids and said my boyfriend's father molested my daughter. Then turned around and gave that same man custody of my 2 kids. And put them with Mark and Misty Ray. How can they do that? And why are for their stuff.
That's
Right, I agree. Yeah.
The perpetrator gets away, and the family rips it apart.
They didn't even give me a termination hearing or nothing. They told me if I didn't sign my rights, they was gonna take my 9-year-old from the delivery room. And then turn around and gave him to his dad, who supposedly molested my daughter. And now look at my kids. Look at my kids because of the state of Iowa.
Yeah. And R&R is going to be the major question. R&R for these kids is going to be something that will cost a fortune, maybe.
Now, we're going to get to community testimonies here in just a second, but we do have a couple other speakers we want to make sure and get to. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so let me turn it over to them.
Are you're
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Let's go.
Well, thank you very much, Connie Reguli.
And I have bracelets that say,
I think those are phenomenal.
our
by the
kids
way.
are not for sale. I am kind of selling them because I had to pay.
Now, one thing I want to be clear about is I don't think there's anybody in this room that's saying that we don't want to be protecting children and that children don't need to be protected and that there are times that they are in dangerous situations. But what we're saying is that it's became very clear at this critical mass point that the system we are using is not actually protecting and helping these children, the families, or the communities. I have a few stats right here that are over 10 years old right now. They definitely need to be updated. But every medical person I've talked to, every legislator, every attorney thinks that these numbers have actually risen. So the numbers here, girls in foster care that are pregnant at the age of 19, 50%. Former foster kids in U.S. prisons, 74%. Incarcerated within 2 years of being aged out, 50%. Foster care, former foster youth on death row, 80%. Children, foster care children in the U.S., that number's old, and she already discussed some of those numbers there. Again, with these numbers there, the incarceration, the pregnancy, you're bound to repeat these cycles over and over again. And if we are not improving those lives, if we're not creating honorable students, entrepreneurs, if we are just creating a cycle to put more kids into the system, then who are we really helping other than the system? So we really need, the primary factor is to take care of these children. The best way we feel to do that is to empower the families to have the tools that they need to fight against poverty or any lack of knowledge leading to neglect, any of these problems. It is very, very rare that it is a sexual abuse, a physical abuse. And nobody's arguing getting those children protected. But what we are arguing is that most of the time that is not the case. It is simply poverty is enough to get these children removed. So that also goes back to one of the, how do these calls start in the first place? We have found that on a very consistent basis, obviously not all, and we are pushing for a legislative study to get the actual numbers, but most of these calls start out as a retaliatory call, primarily during a custodial division. So we know one of the reoccurring things that has been echoed here in Iowa is more money for the DHS budget, more workers to be able to go after all these people. We see that as a waste of resources for the most part when we should be doing studies to see, are these calls even justified in the first place? If we can have better custodial laws to eliminate the retaliatory calls in the first place, if we can change our hotline from confidential, where nobody knows who's calling, over to anonymous, to where you are still protected, but yet you can be held accountable for false allegations, that right there is going to reduce the number of calls coming in. And probably not overnight, but pretty dang fast. Because nobody's going to want to go to prison for claiming something against their significant other. So we feel that that's going to be one of the big primary first steps, is to really just look at where these calls are coming from, address that so that we can weed through and go after the ones that truly are in need of help. Because there are lots of kids that really need the help. But again, is removal the best? putting them on death row, repeating this cycle? We think not. We think we need to have more family services, be comfortable to tell the truth to these workers so that we can get the services that we truly need. And that will in turn begin to nourish these children and create new patterns within America. So our next speaker has came a great distance. You may have seen her on last year's presidential ballot. That would be the Libertarian candidate Lynn Kahn. So we're going to go ahead and bring her on up here. After that, we will go on to community testimony. Oh, can you go up front? Yeah, we got the cameras on there. Oh wait, did you want the projector too?
No.
Okay.
Let's all just take a breath and feel the love and support in this room, because it's very emotional. These conversations are so emotional. Where was Connie who said, don't cry or don't cry?
There's a microphone.
Huh? Do I need a microphone?
I don't know if they're hooked up or not.
Just talk really loud.
Yeah.
I'll talk really loud. So I asked everyone to take a break. I mean, just take a breath and feel how much support there is in this room for what everyone is going through. This is really, really emotional. I am Dr. Lynn Kahn. I was an independent candidate for President of the United States, independent. I was on the ballot in Iowa as the nominee of the new Independent Party of Iowa, and on the ballot in the writing candidate in other places. And I'm not done yet. So I was 20 months on the road and probably 70,000 miles driving around the country, and I got to Nick and Janine, Tanya's, Toya's Family Preservation Town Hall meeting. And all I can say, I'm typical of people that haven't been really involved. I had no idea. And that was a huge turning point, because I just heard family after family get up and talk about how their child or their grandchild and their families had been devastated and traumatized by Iowa DHS. And there were a few people talked about they were non-custodial parents and that their child went to live with someone who was either abusive, and in one case, well-known case, a 2-year-old child given to the mother was murdered by an overdose of Oxycontin. And these are just, and then there were just the regular, I can't see my child. The custodial parent will not let me see my child. The custodial parent took my child out of state. I don't know where the custodial parent took my child. And for me it was, because this is the end of the campaign, this was like month 19 of 20 months, it was October. It was overwhelming in some ways, and then I left, and then election, and I took a while to recover. And they kept bothering me, so I came back this past summer just to meet up with people. Did I really hear this right? Is this really what's happening? And yes, this is really what's happening. I did my research. I met with people in 4 different cities in Iowa. I did a lot of online research, and about a month ago, I wrote an article called The 95% Failure Rate of Foster Care in America, which was published by a small political website. And I'm working on this follow-up piece, which is solutions. So I'm happy we're talking about some of that. I don't need to remind you how bad the problem is. Read my 95% failure rate to see all the ways in which outcomes for children put in foster care are generally terrible and lifelong. There's lifelong damage. There's much less research about the other part that relates, which is family court, family judges making a decision about who is the custodial parent, and the other parent doesn't get to see their child. There's hardly any research about that. Who knows? So I wrote this article, and I just want to share with you some of the pushback I got. First of all, if people don't know what's happening, it's almost unbelievable. You know, it's like, is this really happening in America? They just don't get it. And I had numbers in there, 95%. Where did you get your 95% failure rate? Well, there are people that are saying only 3, 4, or 5% of the children that are taken by Child Protective Services, or whatever it's called, are really in danger, have been really physically or sexually or emotionally assaulted and damaged, and really need to be taken out of their homes. That's 5%. If you add in some of the problems we're having now with the opioid crisis, maybe it goes up to 6 or 7%, 8%. I think it's well over a 90% failure rate. That means 90% of the time a child is taken away from the family. That is the wrong decision. It's a bad decision. So, my PhD is in clinical psychology. I worked as an organizational psychologist inside the federal government for 32 years, including 6.5 years in the White House Partnership to Reinvent Government. So I really understand government mechanics. So when I hear this stuff, my head goes, what's the solution? How are we going to fix these agencies? And I do work in probation reform, juvenile justice reform, and homeless services reform. So I do believe that there are ways to dramatically transform agencies that are doing the wrong thing. And pretty much every Child Protective Services organization or agency is doing the wrong thing. It's incredibly damaging. So when I think about it, and I'm trying to sort it out in ways that make sense. So I'm trying, this article on solutions should be published at the end of next week, so thank you, Connie, for your wonderful ideas. And I heard Nick talking about a few things too. So when I think about how do you actually, as a strategic planner, organizational psychologist, how do you take a broken system and what can you do to fix it? The first thing is new leadership. I've never seen a system that's broken get transformed without new leadership.
Right.
Yeah. What? Never seen a system.
It needs new leadership. If there's any hope that a state DHS or Child Protective Services can transform themselves and do the right thing, it takes new leadership. So at least we have a new head of DHS in Iowa. When I think about all the different kinds of changes that have to be made, I've been thinking there's like 5 different kinds. So the first is what's happening here today. It's personally getting yourself educated. So it's really important to listen and hear how you approach, what words do you use to talk about what's happening to you. So educating yourself is really important. The second thing is finding a support group. You can't do this alone. You just can't do this alone. And I see a lot of that Facebook mail going back and forth. And Facebook is a wonderful place to find support groups and get answers to questions from people who have been through the system. I want everybody who came today to find one other person in this room and reach out and connect with somebody else. You need that support. You can't do this by yourself. So there's a personal education, there's finding a support group, and then there's how do you change these agencies? I'm a strategic planner, and I've done this work in doing probation reform. It begins with finding a new purpose for that agency.
New what?
Purpose, mission.
Good.
Because I don't think they're doing the right thing. They're emphasizing child protection maybe, or child safety, but there's no balance with building stronger families. And so if the mission is broken, if they're not talking about as part of their mission building stronger families, then their goals are broken and their actions are broken and the rewards inside the system, because people are talking about, well, the caseworkers get bonuses if they terminate parental rights. All that stuff is broken. And you can't even start fixing it unless you say, well, I'm going to be driven by a mission that says this agency will guarantee child safety in Iowa and work to build stronger families. So it's have it part of the first step. Having a new mission, having goals that relate to that new mission, which would then be that 6-to-1, instead of $6 going into taking kids and $1 to helping families, and I think it's way worse than that. If your objectives are changed, your mission is changed, then the money will be changed. And hopefully budgets will be changed to support the new mission. So the first thing is change the mission and the goals and the measures of success. What does success mean? It's not working. It's not working. All the data shows how horrible it is to take kids away from their family unit. So change the mission, change the objectives or goals, change how the money is being literally used to support those new goals, and come up with new metrics. So that's kind of like technically what you do when you go in. So the first part, change all that. But the second part is really follow the money. How exactly is that money being used? And this means, not us, but who's ever going to manage this transformation in Iowa and the other states, really have to look at how money is being used, what is it going for, what are the results. You have to, like somebody said, we're spending all this money and the results aren't any good. In fact, they're destructive. They're going the wrong way. So it all kind of fits together. And then the third part is fix the broken policies. And I worked in a very broken juvenile services agency, or was the consultant. They had a book of broken policies. And you have that problem here. Almost every single policy is going in the wrong direction. So whatever those kind of the long-term changes that need to happen, along with the short-term, immediate, how can we fix that, that is going to be incumbent on the new director of Human Services in Iowa. So some of these things are what we've all been talking about. How about an independent review of all termination of parental rights hearings?
Yeah.
How about going back 10 years and having independent reviews? How about absolutely stop giving bonuses to staff for taking children, stop giving them bonuses for terminating parental rights, stop giving them bonuses for forced adoptions. So just stop. So I think there's some really specific short-term things, and then the longer-term things are new training and really having a new way of making these decisions about when parental rights are terminated. And having the people making those decisions listen to the family, all the things that Connie was talking about. It's illegal, unethical, unconstitutional, it's disgusting. So there are specific, you can have a long list of policy changes that need to happen. So if you change the mission and you change the goals and you change the measures and you follow the money and redirect the money towards the new mission, which would be a lot more building stronger families, and then fix this very long list of broken policies, that's how change happens. So for me, when I think out, and I'm writing this article about solutions, which will be published, I got a website that's going to publish it. So part of it is educating yourself, finding your support group, figuring out, can these agencies change at all? Would be number 3. 4 is changing law. There is a point at which these laws are horrible and they're going in the wrong direction. So there are federal laws in all kinds of different kinds of legislation that have to be changed. And I'll go back to that in a minute. And the 5th part of how you really make change in this whole big messed up system is we really have to go into the culture of family court, which kind of has this win-lose culture. And whether it's around custodial issues or just, why are we taking kids? 95% of the time or 92%, I saw a number in Iowa, 92% of the time the kids are taken, there is no sign of any abuse 6 months after that decision was made. So what's that 92% failure rate? you have to go into family court. There's a point at which we do have to transform the way family court operates. Well, that's a big thing, I know that. But I think maybe we'll talk about some of the legislative things that you're working on. I see some of that happening in juvenile services, juvenile detention, not in Iowa. It's not really very good with juvenile detention. Jails,
There's a big
it's hard.
group that wants that.
Yes,
They're
there's,
working quite a while on transforming all this.
and it's all over now. So I did this work like 8 years ago. It's all over now, and they know each other, and they're helping each other out, and they're sharing best practices. And I think that's what has to happen in this movement. Different people that represent different aspects of it have to come together and make the decision, get my ego out of it, and, well, this is my group, and that's your group, and all come together to talk about, and that's an important part of it, is what is the shared language? We share the same words to describe how broken the system is. And I think we're starting to figure some of that out. And I heard a lot of great, I'm going to put it into my article on solutions. How do we talk about what's happening in a way that crosses all these different groups and brings them all together? I went to that Million Parent March. It was phenomenal. There were maybe 300 parents there. It was great. A lot of people here were there. Things like that really get the word out and use common language for all these different groups. And by the end of the second day, that's what everybody there was talking about. How are we going to come together? What's the message? We're going to have to market this, right? We have to communicate it better. I mean, I had a really good friend of mine who supported my political campaign because I have trouble believing those numbers. It's just too shocking.
And that's what we really worked hard at, is educating the public.
Yes.
Because the public thinks that BHS to your child, you're a bad person.
That's
Family,
true.
All to pay attention to. And thanks to John Niederbach and the gentleman sitting back in the green shirt, they represent, John's been working for good in the state for his whole life, as far as I know. And the family leader man back here, we need everyone who cares about children. And we've got to get the perps out of our government.
And it's going to take a big movement. I mean, I think if you just think about it as a movement, and it is about education and about shared language, and the people that are leading all these different little groups coming together and saying, all right, we're going to do this together, and I'm sure there'll be another Million Parent March. It's starting to happen with juvenile justice, and it's starting to happen with sexual harassment in Hollywood. I mean, it can really break out. It can. And I think that's what would force the changes. I mean, America has to get outraged. I just don't know any other way to say it. And so I'm going to do what I can do. I feel like I have a platform. I just got a monthly column in a website called Independent Voter Network, IVN. And they're calling my column the Government Mechanic. So I have that platform. They get 1 million hits a month, 1 million views a month. There's another website, Democracy Chronicles, and they published my 95% failure rate. They published the solutions, and because I've gotten so much pushback about where are you getting your numbers from, this is too shocking to believe, I'm going to do another one just about what the numbers are, and where do we get these numbers from. So thank you.
If we pay your way, will you come back?
I'm a driver. I drove 1,210 miles to hear Connie. I will try, yes. But I think that for the moment, I came in 15th nationally, which, considering how I absolutely knew nothing about politics, I'm sort of mind-boggling, and what's even more mind-boggling is says, oh, well, now you're an experienced political candidate.
Let me give you a figure. Iowa has 30,000 people on their abuse registry.
Oh, I know that's another issue. I know.
If you fight for your kid, you go on
You stay on the
child abuse list.
Right.
You stay on the
Excuse me. I've heard those stories. I know. Yes. So I'm going to put it out there. I'm working, trying to connect people. I've tried to connect people in this room. As a so-called experienced political candidate. I mean, literally, I have PhDs in psychology. I worked as an organizational psychologist. I retired. I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Should I write another book? Should I do more consulting? Should I go fly fishing? And I tossed and turned all night, and I'm telling you, I literally woke up in the morning, sat up in bed, and said, I want to be president of the United States.
Amen.
And who's in the room? What's that? So, as this experienced political candidate, I do get to talk to small political parties around the country. And I'm in upstate New York. I was in the Washington, D.C. suburbs for 30 years, but I moved. I might run for office in New York. I'm thinking about other things too. But I do know that I have a platform and that I can write stuff and stuff will get published and I can highlight, people in this room. I'm quoting this next one. And just talk about how you build a coalition. Well, that's my commitment.
I had a battle with Senator Grassley. He was trying to put in a bill to give more money to sending foster children out of state. And he and I went really back and forth hard over that. And it literally ended up begging him not to do this because it was going to add to child trafficking. These children would get lost their families.
Yep.
I don't know how that bill turned out.
It's not out there yet. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think
I heard about some of
it went
that.
very far.
But I don't think, bless your hearts, I just also want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, what you've been through, it's hard. And it's hard to get past, it's impossible to get past it. And it's almost impossible to live with. And I'm sorry. I just want you to know that my heart is with you. What else I want to say? The one thing that I think is important for us, because I got a lot of pushback on this 95% failure rate, is that we need to be really clear about the numbers we put out there. I mean, just really clear. And make sure that when we put out numbers, we say what the source is, so that we can use each other's sources and say, yes, here, it's coming from Kids Count, or it's coming from Annie Casey. I'll repeat a conversation we started having, which is, Annie Casey is involved in a lot of this prison reform and juvenile services reform. But they're enabling this. They know what the problems are.
Yeah.
What's the next step? They're not taking the next step.
Are you aware of the that plan? Then I'm going to give you a copy. Because there was a city in Iowa that was one of the most bustling cities in the state, Old White, Iowa, and it just went to hell because of meth. And a lot of this is meth that is in there.
Opioids, right.
And a writer stayed there 2 years, wrote Methland, and the city was ready to kill him. But he had talked to all the people who had gotten zoned. And coming to his rescue were 2 or 3. There was a doctor and one of the city people and someone else, psychologist maybe, psychiatrist. And they got together with him and they brought the city back. And I can send you some stuff about it.
I'm kind of overwhelmed with reading stuff, but I think that can happen in this foster care world. And it's a longer haul to make it happen in family court with family lawyers, but I think it can happen too.
Lynn, we totally appreciate you coming and talking with us and using your platform across the nation to spread what's going on and finding resources in other states and hearing similar stories in other states about what's going on. So I know that we definitely appreciate you coming on.
And I appreciate
We appreciate you. Just remember that in this fight, when you're on your knees, start praying, because that is where your strength comes from.
So one is, I really want to thank you for the resolutions what your handout, because what I'm going to start doing, at least in New York, is go around to all the small independent parties, the Greens, Libertarians, Reform Party, and try and put something about foster care reform in their platform.
Right.
So I think there's so many things that are going on. There are a lot of lawsuits that are beginning to move forward. There are class action lawsuits that are beginning to move forward. Social media, right? We're connected because of social media. Find your support on social media. I think there are enormous changes that are happening. And I'm going to close with one thing, which is, so why am I so invested in this issue? So I'm an old lady. My parents and my mom and dad grew up in the same orphanage. My mom's two sisters were there with her. My dad and his brother were there. So I'm the generation. Those of you who have lost your children, I just want to tell you, I'm that generation. Okay, my parents didn't. That's where they met, in the orphanage. That's where they grew up, in the orphanage. And until I was like 10 or 12, everyone I knew was an orphan, or spouse or child of an orphan. But here I am, and I ran for president. So your kids and your grandkids, they can pull it together, and they can move beyond the situation that life has put them in. So please have hope. There's so much going on.
Thank you very much for Lynn here. I do owe her an apology. I introduced her as a libertarian, but that just goes to show how much I've been trying to suppress my memories of the last election successfully, it appears.
I did take it. It took a while to recover.
So we've already mentioned again, the poverty issue, and that goes more than just financial poverty, but that goes for poverty of knowledge. And I truly believe that we can take all of these systems of poverty and through passion and persistence that we can tip the scales and prevail. So we're going to go ahead, we're getting slightly backed up on schedule, but we're going to move on to community testimonials, and we do want to keep them very short and primarily keep on to your solutions towards improving the system. We understand that everybody here has their own personal experience as to why they are here and why they are passionate about this. But we could spend hours on that, and we do plan on setting up some other events like Nancy talked about, so we can get your true personal experience. But today, again, we want to stay short and stay on solutions. So just real quick about my testimony is when I started this, I have never been involved in CPS case, but hopefully say it that way. No reason to be, but I was going through a divorce. And there was no rebuttable presumption of shared parenting. It was the attorney told me that if my wife at the time would not only have to be in jail, but probably have to be arrested 4 or 5 times for me to even have a shot at equal custody for no other reason than that was a man. Now, whether that was his own, opinion or true facts, one could debate. But when you look at the actual stats, it's 90% of the time that would be correct. A man has to fight so much harder, spend so much more money, and there is little proof saying that they are less qualified. So after getting into that fight, trying to go for equal custody of my children, which I did end up getting, it took 4 years and more money than I ever dreamt spending. And technically on paper, I only got 49% to ensure that I still had that child support payment so that the state could get their Title IV-D kickback too. So throughout all of that, I began to become aware not only of all of the massive custodial connections, but the connection to the Child Protective Services, and that you could try and reform one part of it, but it's really hard to adjust either of the parts without looking at the whole family system as a whole. So again, we're going to try and keep these testimonies short. The lady going out the room, Toya, Iowa Code Chapter 232 is about this thick, and one of our recommendations is she has completely rewritten that sucker. So we're not going to read all of that, but we will make our brief recommendations after your chance for testimonies. So we do ask that you please come up here to the table so we can get you on camera and speak loud so that everybody in back can hear you, please.
nice to meet you.
Beloved, right?
What'd you say?
Beloved, is that Beloved Grace?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Beloved Grace, that's me. My testimony is 44 years, so I'm going to make it real short and brief as possible.
Can you speak louder?
Slow down.
And slower.
I've been in the system since I was a child, for off and on for 44 years now. I'm truly here by the grace of God and some ignorance, and I'm okay with that. So I just wanted to say that nothing is impossible through God and Jesus, and my solution is coming together, and we've been given an opportunity. I'm in a safe house with Team Jesus because the last 2 years with DHS and my 4 kids has just been a total nightmare. And so my pastor that runs the safe house rescued me out of the woods. I was sleeping homeless in the woods about 6 weeks ago. And so I'm very grateful. It's a safe house for human trafficking. He's very compassionate. We go to court October 31st, and I know for myself that this is over with DHS because they don't have the proof that they say that I put my kids in life-threatening imminent danger enough to take my kids. And so anyway, I just want to say that nothing's impossible through God, and we just have to come together, and we need a mass. And so if everybody just gets the fear, just get the fear out of the way, then everybody can stand up to DHS. And we can do this, you guys. We can do this. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. We have an opportunity, so we need to take advantage of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. God bless you. My name is Melody Nelson. My grandson's name is Sky Nelson. I'm here today. My daughter was making some bad choices, and I needed to get her help for her drug addiction. So I reached out to DHS. That was the worst mistake of my life. They terminated her rights, did not give her the services to stay reunited with my grandson, but they also took him out of my life. I was the first person that he seen when he came out of her womb. And I have been fighting ever since. I took care of him most of his life. I was his caretaker. And they don't acknowledge that. They lie. They said that I used drugs with my daughter when he was taken away. They told the judge that. I was clean and sober since 2009. I reached out to them, and they made the judge think that I was using drugs with her for him to get removed. I've written letters, come here numerous times. I will continue to fight to be reunited with Sky Nelson. They will never take away that bond we have. And I want to thank everybody for coming here and being an advocate. I hate that we have to do this. And I have hope that it will change. And I have a bumper sticker that says I'm a dopeless hope fiend. Because that's me today.
Amen.
And I am Sky's grandma. I will always be Sky's grandma. And Sky, I hope you forgive me for doing this. Because I'm having a hard time forgiving myself. That's all I got. Thanks.
My name's Joel Jackson. I've been in and out of the family courts for almost 20 years now. I have they'll be 20 years old this year. 2 boys that one of them I gained custody of when he was 5 years old. Maintained custody of him. His mother had no contact with him. Didn't receive a dime in child support. Been going through the courts for that many years to receive child support. Somehow she's lost in this big world of ours. But yet she was on parole. She was on probation. They knew where she was. It's just she was in another state. which is Texas. The state of Texas does not recognize the Iowa laws. Iowa will not go and get her and bring her back because it's cutting into their budget, which I was paying child support on my other son, his brother. So myself, I feel that the money that I was paying to our government for the child support going to the Title IV to help gain child support for me, for you, for everybody, they contradicted themselves in that one statement. Then, with my soon-to-be 10-year-old daughter, I finally have joint custody of her. It only took 8 years, which 2.5 of them years I didn't get to see her. And the mother had falsified allegations against me to get me out of the house of sexual acts on a minor child, which she brought that child into the house for that weekend just to get me out of the house. She tried to say I was using drugs, which the Drug Enforcement Task Force went to the house. They did not find anything to criminally charge me on that, nor did they file any criminal charges against me on the sexual acts on the minor. Well, just this past April, I have begun fighting for my son that was born into the custody of DHS, while her mother's in jail in Blackhawk County, which is now 7.5 months old. They violated my due process rights right from the beginning by not letting me have a removal hearing. They gave the removal hearing to the pursuing father that also was in jail. He was verified almost a month and a half after the baby was born that he was not the father. Then April 4th, they come to me and said, well, we think you might be the father also, so we need to get your DNA test. So she scheduled that out to May 2nd, which was 2 days before the adjudication hearing. Those DNA tests would not be back in time for that hearing. So I called up LabCorp, said, can I come in and take a DNA test? How booked are you? They said, you can come in this afternoon. But my worker had told me on the telephone that they were booked till May 2nd. That's another violation. She had the department, not only her, but her supervisor, all the way up to the ladder to Mr. Jerry Foxhoven over here in the building over here, has violated a stack of their own policies that tall. And to this day, they put sweat patches on me that keep falling off, and automatically they're positive for methamphetamines. But I go in and take UA tests for them. Those are negative. And in the time that these patches are on my arm, I go and take my own UAs at my private lab, and those are negative. But yet they don't consider those as a test result that stands up in court because it's my provider. So, like today, I just found out that the past 2 patches that I documented was in contact with the worker every day, pictures, everything, showing that these patches are falling off. I work for the Heartland Co-op, working around a bunch of chemicals, and now they have, today actually, they filed a report to terminate my rights because of these falsified, false positives or whatever they are on these sweat patches. I have talked to medical examiners. They state that the most accurate drug tests are the UAs and blood. He does not support the patch because they have over 40% false positive rate. You can walk into a bathroom. Let's say you're at a truck stop. Somebody's in there smoking marijuana, doing heroin, whatever. You can pick that drug up through the air onto that patch. So, you know, I'm here today with all you because we're all going through this. We're all being falsely accused of, mainly, I'd probably say 90% of the time that the DHS is involved, they falsely accuse of people being on drugs. Then they send them to their own laboratories that I have a credible source that somebody got fired here in Des Moines at the laboratory that they used for altering drug tests to people that she didn't like. That got wiped under the table. Not one mention of it. I got that name. I've been advocating with people across the state, over in Lynn County and Black Hawk County mainly. In July, every test that went through these facilities in Iowa back in July, between June 28th and July 15th, were sent to a laboratory. Both hair and urine samples were all positive for methamphetamines. Every single one of them. Okay, and that's when I first initially took the first patch and the first UA. It got sent to this lab. That's when we went to the adjudication hearing, and that's their allegations. That's the only thing that they could use against me because I have no other records, nothing that they can use against me to keep my son from me. So I'm just here to raise awareness on the whole reasons why they are taking our children away. And that is for the federal funding. Because every dollar that they get, the federal gives them a match back. And all these testing facilities they take out of their own pockets $28, all the way maybe $125 to do the most expensive test. To put that one person into a treatment facility for 30 days, that payback is $75 to $7,800 that they give that testing facility. Who in the right mind wouldn't pass down an investment like that? So we need to hold people accountable. They need to be held accountable for the falsified tests. They need to look back at tests it from the TPRs 4 months ago, that these drug tests back in July all came up positive. Because there's many, many people that I know personally that are not on drugs, that have not been on drugs. Matter of fact, there was one person that was in treatment 30 days. And he was supposedly doing drugs in treatment facilities. It doesn't make sense. Not one bit.
Yes, it does when you're talking about the money coming into their hands.
Well, yes, it makes sense to them. But I'm here for as long as it's going to take us to abolish this system. I'm not looking to really reform the system. I'm looking to shut down the system of DHS because they are nothing but a bunch of crooks. But that's all I got for you. Thank you.
Every time I sit down or a new speaker comes up, I think of about 100 things that I wish I would have said, new topics that I get reminded of, and it just, again, shows what a big problem and how many areas are affected by this issue. To respond to Joel right here, I wouldn't even be surprised that maybe some of these social workers are switching the results with their own UAs, because it is shown and through their own admission that over 85% of the social workers are using drugs and alcohol on a daily basis from their own admission. But yet they're going out and terminating rights from people for a suspicion of said substances. So we'll go ahead, a couple more testimonies here, and then we will get to our recommendation.
Living next door to a caseworker who is one of the veterans, and she no longer lives there, but she was gone night and day, and sometimes 3 days at a time, holidays. She was never home. So the caseworkers that got to Matt McCoy did a number of them.
Hi, my name is Melissa Martin, for anybody that doesn't know me. I was only certified ADA. Tanya is taking the course. Are you already certified? She's not. Yeah, she doesn't have her certificate yet, but we do have 2 more people becoming certified. And so, like, instead of explaining my story, because it's about the same, mine was a divorce custody case where the juvenile courts got false reports. However, I was able to, well, they wouldn't take me to court because I know the laws and I know the policies. So mine was with a crooked sheriff who was a pedophile who helped my ex get custody of my children. But anyway, a little bit about the ADA. The ADA allows us to go to court for people that have illegal abuse syndrome, which is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder caused by litigation. So when rights are violated, people sustain injuries, and oftentimes these injuries are classified as mental illnesses. However, it's not a mental illness, it's a mental injury. So for an example, I have a client here today who would like to tell her story, but she's scared to tell her story just because of what has happened in the past. So, for example, in the courtroom, I could communicate that to the court because just the stress of litigation is enough to qualify somebody for ADA accommodations, because that interferes with your communication. It transfers the electrical energy in the brain from the communication centers to the survival centers, where you go into like a fight or flight survival mode, which is just a natural instinct for parents because we want to protect our children. My client that is here today, she is aware of her own family members being involved with child sex trafficking. They are involved with the government, they are infiltrated into the police, they're in all different types of government positions, and so the Department of Human Services has also participated in feeding them children. The first time she tried to expose what happened, she ended up sustaining some head injuries, getting put into the hospital, where she signed guardianship over to her mother for her children because she was unable to care for herself with her head injuries, let alone her children. That turned into a termination of parental rights. And so then, do the short version here, several years later, she got some information from her son in the form of a letter, and I've personally seen the letter, and it's handwritten in a child's handwriting. And a child doesn't just make this stuff up in a letter. She reported this to DHS 3 different times. The first 2 times they didn't even open an investigation. The 3rd time they did open an investigation. However, it was unfounded. So when she found out that her stepdad was molesting her children, she went to DHS. DHS would not react, so she took her children and she left. Her mother put out an Amber report, or an Amber alert on her. And so what happened is they came and they arrested her for kidnapping, and they took her children to a foster home that knows her family, that knows the sex trafficking system. So then she signs under duress in jail and pleads guilty to the charges just to get probation and get out of jail. She transfers her case down to Missouri, and so then she's in trouble losing her house in Missouri due to the time she was in jail. Because she was falling behind on payments. So now, I don't know if it's an effort to keep her from coming here in front of everybody or what, but she was trying to get a transfer back here to Iowa, where she has a place to stay that she doesn't have to worry about losing. And so they were dragging their feet on that, and I talked to her last week, and then we put in some ADA accommodations, and then all of a sudden at her next meeting, because they were threatening her with jail, and they didn't want to accept the substance abuse evaluation, which recommended she does not need to go to treatment. So the probation officer was saying she has to hurry up and get another one done by this time, or she's going to jail, which was in conflict with her employment. But just the day before her birthday, which was yesterday, the probation officer called and let her know, well, the next time she went to the probation officer was just pushing to get her moved. And so then the next day, which was the day before her birthday, the probation officer sent her an order to be in Iowa by noon the next day to sign up for probation. But she was still worried about moving her stuff. So, I mean, it's really ridiculous. They require you, so anyway, they did give her an extension until Tuesday. And And so then part of this also is that she has a dog, and this dog is the only child she has not lost yet. And so when she moved up here, where she was staying, they don't allow pets. And now just today, she got a message while she was on her way here, this is why she was late, saying that the dog tried to bite somebody at the bordering house where she left her dog, and so it had to go to the vet, and it had to be sedated, and now she has a $500 bill to get her dog back, and that just happened right this morning. And so I guess that's a good example of the type of things that we can communicate to the court for you, just to make the court record. Not as an attorney, I act as non-attorney legal counsel a lot of times for pro se, or people who file a proper persona sui juris, which means in your own person by your own right. However, I'm not a lawyer. I don't practice law. I just give people the information, and then when they want to use it in their records, I can support that and I can communicate that to the court. Or as far as testimony, that's hard for people to communicate to the court, because obviously somebody who's talking about their own case goes into the trauma mode and the flashbacks, and they can't make that court record. So this would be an example. I mean, this isn't a courtroom, and we're all here to fix it, but is there anything else you want to add to the...
No, I think you were doing great. I think you were doing great. I just wanted to emphasize just a little bit about like what Connie was stating earlier, how it's very imperative to get people in place and like Lynn Kahn said, you know, like the directors, you know, start at the top, get people in place with sympathy that can empathize with families and empathize with their actual lifestyles. Now, we as ADA advocates, we don't come here lightly to this certification level. I, on the other hand, have a pre-law degree. She has other degrees. So we don't come at all uneducated. But with all the experience that I've had in my lifetime, I would have to say that the ADA being used in litigation as to communicate properly with the courts and hold those in the administration accountable for violating these invisible disabilities and very clearly visible. I myself was in a wheelchair just 9 months ago, so as a lot of you know. It's very imperative that we come to the table with very personal experiences that are decades long. Mine, on the other hand, is 34 years long of personal experience with CPS involvement. So not only do I know it from as a childhood point of view, being in foster care, group homes, shelters, being in there with murderers and rapists, 12 years old, I've seen it all at that level as a child. I myself also was a mother who had my children taken, so I went all through to the TPR, and as a lot of people know, my oldest has aged out, rock on, and it's not the best deal, but I did go to college to get a law degree. However, I sustained an injury, which is why I have a lot of sympathy towards the disability level, and have been disabled for the last decade. So I think it's very imperative that we come as an ADA advocate for our litigants in the courtroom so that we can properly communicate with the courts and hopefully get some sympathy and empathy back where it belongs. Because a lot of these judges, county attorneys, social workers, you know, everybody involved, all the stakeholders, they literally are desensitized and trained at one level, mission, and mission accomplished. Prosecution, that's it. I mean, so we have to stop, slow things down, and then we hold accountability.
The violations
so
of the due process rights is a major one, and that is, like, I think, the major cause of the disabilities that the courts are causing. It's the violation of rights, the violation of due process, being able to question your witnesses. But one more thing I want to add about the case that I just told you about. On her birthday, she got a message, or she got a happy birthday call from her mother, who stated that she was going to start getting visitation with her children again. And today, while we're here, this mother that was responsible for allowing the sexual abuse to happen is having an unsupervised visit with her children. So I don't know how much of a coincidence that is, but it runs pretty deep here in Iowa, and anybody that doesn't understand that or who hasn't seen The Conspiracy of Silence, which is a documentary the Discovery Channel did on the Johnny Gosch kidnapping, and how the FBI dropped the ball, and how they're involved, how the foster care system's involved. They did this documentary over a decade ago, and they were prohibited from airing it on TV, but it is on YouTube now. And then there's another movie out called Who Took Johnny, which is on Netflix, about the Johnny Gosch kidnapping. Nobody's ever been removed from the FBI. Nobody's ever been investigated in the foster care system other than through a man named Frank Bonacci, or Paul Bonacci, and his depositions are on YouTube, which if you listen to those, it will show you what they do to people and how they silence them. He says they'll try to get you put in prison. They'll try to make you look crazy. They will kill you. And
we
they're
are
very
free
successful
from
doing that. They'll
retaliation.
plant drugs on you. They'll do whatever it is that they have to do to keep somebody silent that knows about it. And so I guess that was, if you don't understand how it works, those are good. And he actually did win a $1 million lawsuit against one individual involved in it with his depositions. And I'm not sure that was in the Who Took Johnny documentary. However, that is also on YouTube. And it is involving the Department of Human Services, it's involving the police, it's involving the FBI. And nobody's ever been removed. It doesn't get investigated. And so this is another uphill battle that we're fighting right here in Iowa. And the Omaha FBI office covers the west part of Iowa, and they're directly involved in covering up the Johnny Gosch kidnapping information. So this is another way that the Department of Human Services participates in child trafficking, not only for money through the courts, like Connie clearly explained, but also with this ring, which I don't know a whole lot about. I just had learned about it after this crooked sheriff came out to hit on me in 2013, and then later I found out he was a pedophile and he did the same thing to children, threatened with sending them to juvenile hall for sexual favors or whatever. But at that time, I didn't know that. I didn't know how they operated, so I dealt with a lot of retaliation. I've had to beat probably 30 different criminal cases, the Department of Human Services, and then, like, still, after proving all that was false and proving he was a liar on the stand, he was still able to testify in my child custody hearing.